So we stumbled across an interesting little space on YouTube.
Okay. I'm excited.
It's like hotel room reviews.
Oh
Okay.
God, it's
where
so good.
people like, they'll all usually just with their phone, or somebody will have like a handy cam and they'll do like a walkthrough of like hotel rooms ranging from like regular hotel rooms to like the really like fancy suites at like resort hotels and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And all of the people that we found, at least, who make these videos are like, it's always like there's some gimmick, right? There's, in addition to them giving the presentation, there's some gimmick to their like who they are, and a lot of them are like sort of like hustle success cool guys.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There was one that's just like New York. It's like, hey, I'm the New Yorker, and I'm going to hotels. And there's a bunch of them. There was one we found that like had, like 10 views on every video. It was called The Young Entrepreneur.
Oh, that was so good.
Because like in any subculture breakdown thing of like internet media shit, there's like people who are very successful at doing this. Like the New York guy has like a few million subscribers. A few of the other ones have big numbers, and then there's like a lot of copycat people who are trying to do that same thing. And they all suck in their performance, right? Like, because it's like, who wants to? It's just somebody going around a hotel room being like, oh yeah, coffee maker, there it is.
Check it out. It's got a sofa.
Here's the bed.
Yeah.
This room has 2 TVs or whatever.
I was gonna say my favorite was the guy whose like kids were visibly like in the background, and they're like being dragged along with their dad doing this like tour of a hotel room that he probably went and asked like the front desk like, hey, can I tour the nice room? Like they're not even staying in it.
That was the thing.
Yeah.
That guy, it was like at one of the Caesars in Atlantic City, and it was like one of the expensive, big suites you can get there.
The Senator Suite.
Yeah, the Senator Suite. And he was like walking through it, and then at one point he's like, here's the view. You can see the other Caesars Tower. That's where the normal hotel rooms are. That's where I'm staying.
Yeah.
So he's not even staying in the nice room.
Yeah.
And it's not, there's nothing insightful to say about a fucking hotel room, right? It's just like, it has the amenities.
He's like, here's the mini fridge, and then in the background you just see his kid who like hates him and just wants to like go out.
Yeah, it's really, really incredible. And like a lot of ones we were watching were like, some of them were very old, but some of them were like recent, like during the pandemic, like people are wearing masks.
Yeah.
And I just imagine like you go, I guess that's the time to do it with like the big fancy room, because a lot of the hotels like had nobody in them or whatever. But I just imagine just like the weirdness of doing that. Like, I don't know. It's such a strange, and again, to have it kind of coupled with like, it's like a shittier version of Cribs or something, or like the lifestyles of the rich and famous, but you don't even get to like do it.
Yeah.
You're just
You're
like,
just presenting
man, imagine if I could afford this room.
Right.
Make money.
Well, wait, what was her name? I forgot her name. The account that we got the whole Fazoli's thing from.
Oh, yes. No,
you can't say her name. No.
You can't say her name.
I know, but
because that already went down. But yes, they did. They had a couple of motel.
Yeah.
They had 2 like motel reviews, and at the time I thought that was novel because the rest of their content was so quirky and weird, like doing reviews of very basic reviews of fast food. Or there was like another one that was like 30 minutes long, and it's just them walking through a Target, being like, "Here's all the stuff at the Target. Like, here's the section where the DVDs are.
They're so pure.
Here's the section where the clothes are."
When they do it, it's good.
Right, but again, I thought that was, they just had this weird feeling that like doing reviews would be like a good YouTube idea, but I guess they are. Like that's a
whole genre.
Thing.
Yeah.
It is.
There are people who, but there's no content to the review. There's no not even like a moral judgment on what. It's just like there's no like at the end of the day like 5 out of 5 stars or whatever. It's literally just like, wow, look at this room. Here's the bed. Here's the window.
Yeah.
Here's the chair.
You got a hairdryer. Yeah.
Like and subscribe.
What those people are trying to land is like the deals that people get where like the hotel literally just like flies them out to take a picture there and gives them a free vacation, which is like there's a bunch of influencers that do that.
Sure, right. Yeah, but I always imagine that like if you already are an influencer or whatever, and you have like a big platform and presence, and it's like, it's like product placement.
Right.
The brands want to pay you you to like wear certain things or like be at their restaurant or whatever. This is like from the ground up. I'm just doing the hotel
just
reviews.
Promoting you for free. Please give me money.
There was another one where it was like the guy, I think it was the young entrepreneur, where it was like, and he had like 10 views on all of his videos, and he had one that was like a view of the Disney hotel.
It was rain at the Polynesian. That's what you're thinking.
Yeah, while it's raining. And it was 50 seconds long, and it was just a video outside his window of just rain at a Disney location with nothing happening. No commentary. Just the other weird thing too is you could hear him breathing. So and he didn't say
That's such
anything.
a
And
nice
all his
touch,
videos were like
So
that, where he's just walking around a hotel room and you hear like it's like fucking serial killer shit.
It's so good. You know, that could be us if we hustled more.
That's true. Maybe we should do that. Eat the Rich sponsored hotel reviews. I'll do like a Hot Pocket reviews, and it's just a video of me like eating a Hot Pocket.
Breathing into the...
Like breathlessly.
That's a whole, I mean, like, like
no comment.
Like, you got to do it in a car. That's a whole, whole genre of itself. Just a dude just alone in a car eating like a fucking, quesarito or whatever from Taco Bell and reviewing it.
We watched a few of those, I think, when you were here last summer. We watched them.
I already have the perfect to do like a whole channel like that. I'm already eating in my car.
Oh my goodness.
That's perfect.
Why are we even fucking talking about this? Stop. Let's just not record this episode. Let's just let's just brainstorm some shit we can eat.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No sir, I'd be no average man. So I had those big dreams.
Welcome back, everybody, to Eat the Rich, the show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Shane, and tonight we have with us Chris.
Howdy.
And Carrie.
Hello.
Hey, I did that pretty good.
Yeah, good job, honey.
As you can tell.
You did
Thanks. Dwight is still on his secret mission in an undisclosed location somewhere on the East Coast that we won't mention. But in his absence, today what we wanted to talk about was just weird Gilded Age sickos. And we did a similar episode like this, like a year ago
early
now,
on.
Or maybe even
earlier than that.
Earlier, yeah. And this is one of those ones where we kind of just take a topic and then we all go into our little corners and directions and then try to find just like the weirdest shit to bring back and share with each other and all of you. In doing so, I think one of the reasons I like doing these kinds of episodes is that, first of all, it's like fun, right? Because it's when it's so wide open, you really get to just search around and try to find like the weirdest thing or like indulge any kind of like rabbit hole you start falling down in your research. Or the other reason that I like doing it is I do think that, talking about the historical stuff is really important in pairing it with the typically more kind of contemporary material we do, both in the sense that it's always important to understand and learn and kind of chronicle the history, usually like a history that is not often taught, right? Like when you cover these periods at school or whatever. I mean, one of the things me and Carrie did just to start off is we found this like video on YouTube that was like a digitalization of like a high school VHS.
It was so sick,
tape
dude.
From like the 80s or the 90s that was called The Gilded Age, right? And it was like a 30-minute video that just like, that you'd play in a high school history class or something when
the teacher's too hungover.
Wasn't there. Right, yeah, exactly. And of course, their version of the Gilded Age was like, it like briefly mentions like some horrible stuff and the strikes, and it's like there's like one line, it's like there were also racial inequities, and then it keeps going. It mentions like the genocide of the Native Americans without calling it that.
It was like there were cultural differences.
Right, yeah, exactly. A class of cultures is what it said.
Right.
And so, of course, the point here is that like there's all this weird weird stuff in American history in particular that we're not really privy to. And, you know, beside it just being like an object of curiosity or, you know, trying to like map how it connects to, you know, our own moment or how, you know, that foundational moment in American capitalism like led to the situation we're now in, like at least in the case of my anecdote that I'm going to bring up, and I believe Carrie and yours as well, like, you know, these people, these families are still around. They're maybe not as prominent as they once were, but like, you know, when we talk about like inherited money, we're talking, you know, implicitly about things in the past that happened that then, you know, wealth was accumulated, and now it's just like there's an entire class of people that none of us are in and will never be in, right? Who just don't have to worry about shit. And so with that in mind, the one interesting thing I will say about the that stupid high school history thing that we watched is it did explain like the etymology of the term Gilded Age, which I'd never even like thought about at all. But I guess there was a Mark Twain book that he wrote called The Gilded Age. And at that time, gilding, right, which is like basically covering something in a thin veneer of gold to like pretend, you know, basically like gold plating to make something seem more valuable than it was. So the name Gilded Age originally was intended as like a satirical thing, right? It was something then that historians picked up on to say like, here was this age that was supposedly full of all this like splendor, but in reality it was like corroding and rotten on the inside. And that kind of leads me into my little section, and I'll go first here. And so what I want to talk about is a couple of different things in succession. Again, this was like sort of the rabbit hole that I went down. But the main thing I'm going to be talking about is this list called the 400, or the 400 of New York.
Okay.
And then one particular member of the 400, and at a certain point its leader, a woman named Mamie Fish. And so the 400, like, what is that? I saw that, I was like, what the fuck? So apparently, in the, you know, post-Civil War era, you know, when all of the kind of the booming of industrial capitalism and the expansion, you know, that like era of progress that we find ourselves in New York, right, which has always been the sort of like cultural and social, and a lot of times, you know, the wealth capital of the country, more so than DC. There existed this, you know, group of hyper wealthy socialites who all had ties back to, you know, the colonial era or what have you. And these are families, right, are the names that, like, we know, or at least if you're from New York, you've been to New York, you, like, see in street names, right? Like, the Astors, or, like, you know, the Vanderbilts. Yeah, the Stuyvesants, right? And so what was happening is, I guess there was, like, a social crisis, is the way that members of this group saw that was happening, because after the Civil War, right, you have like the rise of what we call like the robber barons, right? And these are like the nouveau riche, like industrial capitalists who are coming about and doing their like huckster thing and becoming like obscenely wealthy overnight. And so what happened was there was this, you know, kind of influx of like new rich people into the New York social scene of like the wealthy elite. And I guess there was a feeling by some, and particularly by this one woman named Caroline Schimmerhorn Astor, right? You could tell already there. It's like the
two names in there. Yeah, two of them.
And most of these families, by the way, are like all fucking interbred, right? It's like it's the same 5, 6, 7 names in various different combinations within some stupid, you know, first name. And it shows like how intimately connected all these people are. So she was like, you know, one of the leading socialites. And so at some point she compiled this list of 400 like acceptable people in the New York wealthy society elite. And basically, like, if you weren't on this list, you were not going to get invited to shit. And it was designed specifically to keep out like newer rich folks. And then I think also, you know, like, there were a few like immigrant rich families that came over during that time as well. And it was a way to try to maintain like social cohesion of this group. At various points, she was criticized as rumors started to spread of the existence of this list, right? Because it wasn't like announced formally. It was like a secret list that she held. As the rumors started to kind of generate around this thing, right, people speculated that the reason why it was capped at 400 is because, like, her personal ballroom had a capacity of 400. But, you know, of course, they made different claims. No, there was another guy who was like her right-hand man named Ward McAllister, who was like another rich, foppy asshole. And the two of them like enforced not only like the social cohesion, but also like etiquette. Their whole thing was like, this kind of formal idea of like, a fancy party, a dinner party or whatever, this kind of like, the manners of the aristocracy or what have you. And so Ward McAllister also carefully, constructed this list. There were two groups of people on this list. And the way they were described by Skimmerhorn Astor were knobs and swells. So a knob was like the old money families that we discussed, and most of them on the list were knobs. Swells were nouveau riche, who she begrudgingly accepted into the group, right? Depending on certain factors, like could they adopt to these conservative, whatever, like social mannerisms and what have you. And the most kind of prominent and successful version of this were the Vanderbilts, who were like a nouveau riche family, but there were a number of them on this list. So anyway, so this list exists for a very long time, and there's rumors about it, and eventually there are lists that get published and get put into circulation. And in order to like quash the untrueness of these lists, the fake news of the fake 400 lists or whatever that are being published, Ward McAllister finally in 1892 gives the list to the New York Times. And he does an interview with them, and he's like, no, all of these lists that are in circulation are not true. Here's the real list. Now, as you can imagine, when this gets published, everybody is pissed off and furious. First of all, people are mad that, like, there's this, like, elite group, right, that's, like, secretly running things, which is, again, always the thing that gets said that's conspiratorial. It's like, no, it's, like, quite actually true. There is an elite group of incredibly rich people trying to control, like, the culture or whatever of the city. But they also get mad at McAllister. And so the papers, and I love this, they dubbed him, so his name's Mr. McAllister, and so they dubbed him Mr. Make-a-Lister.
Got him.
Which is like, it's like the 1892 version of Eve Fartlow or whatever. It's like that gets published everywhere with his name. And because he leaked the list, his rich friends, like the people in the 400, shun him. They're like so fucking mad at him. So now he's fucked. So he writes this like sad story like memoir about how he got kicked out of the 400 by revealing the information. In any case, in the 1900s, Astor declines into dementia, and she eventually dies in 1908. And a new order emerges among the wealthy elite. And it's ruled by a triumvirate now of women. These three women. And again, if you hear the names, they'll, indicate a lot, right? So the first one is Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, Tessie Ulrichs, and Marion Graves Anton Fish. And Fish is the one that I want to spend the most time talking about, but briefly, the way that the split worked was Belmont was the one who threw the biggest parties because she had the most money, I guess because she was a Vanderbilt. Fish threw the most exotic and notorious ones and was kind of known as like, it was super out there and weird for the time. And then Ulrichs was like the drill sergeant who tried to enforce the polite society norms between the three of them. Just out of curiosity and interest, Belmont was also like a notable suffragette. In addition to her, like, whatever wealthy social scene stuff that she was doing, there was some kind of, like, Obama did, like, some commemoration of her, like, in his, like, last year of office, or, it probably is part of, like, women's history, event or something along those lines. But, talking about Fish now. So her full name was Marion Graves Anton Fish, but her nickname was Mamie, which is such a weird and bizarre nickname. And I do recommend, if you're listening to this and you're by a computer or on your phone, like, check out a picture of Mamie Fish. And in fact, I'll send you guys one right now, because it's so bizarre as the rest of the story gets told, to just like imagine this person doing it.
You know who else has the nickname Mamie?
Who?
Meryl Streep's daughter.
Really?
Yeah. Mamie Gummer.
I've never heard that.
Yeah. Never
heard that before. But yeah, anyway, here's her in a picture with like a tiara, wearing like I guess it's like a corset, and then wrapped with like a fucking elaborate, feathery jacket and stuff.
It's a wonderful image.
She looks really nice. That's just all I can think, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so she was born in 1853 on Staten Island. which again was a moment of joy for me to realize that. She grew up in Manhattan, and she only received a rudimentary education. By her own admission, she could barely read or write. So she was like functionally illiterate.
Okay.
When she was 23, she married Stuyvesant Fish, a bank director, and then he later became the president of the Illinois Central Railroad, but he always lived in New York. So, interestingly, Fish, right, through the wedding to Stuyvesant Fish, did not have nearly as much money as those around her. And this was the case for a lot of, like, the old money families, again, because it was an inherited wealth, and they didn't really, like, work or anything, usually. Or if they did, they had, like, sort of slight management jobs. They weren't, like, amassing the huge fortunes, like the Vanderbilts or the Rockefellers were, the other robber barons of the time. They just lived in wealth. And she was known on many occasions to sort of, like, I don't know, like, humble brag or lament that her husband's fortune was only a few $1 million, as opposed to these other guys. So I read from one place, guessed it was around $3 million, which then I threw into the inflation calculator, and that would today be around over $80 million. So this is considered what was like a smaller rich person, like she wasn't as wealthy as her friends, but it's like almost $1 billion, right? No, I'm sorry. Cut that. It's not almost $1 billion. It's almost $100 million. Whatever. The point is, it's still a lot of fucking money, right? It's more money than like any of us will ever have. Now, as I mentioned, she was known for her exotic parties. And to paint the picture of what those were like, I want to read here from a book from 1989 by Arthur T. Vanderbilt. Called Fortune's Children, and which is sort of like a family history, like relaying all the, I guess, the details of his own, like, do you also have?
Oh, no, I was going to say this, by the way, is last week's episode, that was the exact, Fortune's Children was the title of that same Vanity Fair article. They had the portraits, like the pictures of all of the, the descendants of, modern, the descendants of nobility. That was where the quote from Rebecca de Ravenel, or whatever her name came from.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to read a couple pages from this, and unfortunately I have to do it through this awful e-publication book thing. So give me 1 second to get that up. So I should mention, similar to the way that Skimmerhorn Astor had a sort of like manservant who was another one of these like rich guys in this thing who was like her enforcer. Mamie Fish also did, and her guy's name was Harry Lair. He was another one in this group, and he was sort of her like prankster. The way that he's described in a lot of the stuff written about her is he was sort of the court jester of Fish in their social scene. And so this I'm going to start here, and this begins talking about a little scheme that the two of them are working on. So one evening when Bessie Lair came in from driving, Harry met her in the hall. So Bessie is, his wife. Joseph Leiter has just rung up, he said. He wanted to know whether he might bring a friend to our dinner party tomorrow night. I told him I was sure you would not mind, as it is not to be a big formal affair. Who is the friend? Bessie asked. Prince Del Drago, who is staying on the yacht with him. Joe says he is a charming fellow and comes from Corsica. I asked him whether he was any relation of the Del Dragos whom we met in Rome, and he said that certainly he was. They all belong to the same family, only the prince's is a distant branch. Joe thinks we shall like him immensely, but he warned me that he's a little inclined to be wild. He doesn't want us to give him too much to drink because he is not used to it. Anything goes to his head, and then apparently he is apt to behave rather badly. Of course I shall be delighted to see him, Bessie replied, and I shall tell the butler not to fill up his glass too often. Word that an Italian prince would be at the Lairs' party quickly spread among the guests, who were eager to meet him. At 8 o'clock the next night, the doors of the dining room opened, and there was Chicago merchant Prince Joseph Leiter holding the hand of his guest, a small pet monkey dressed in formal evening clothes. The monkey was treated as the guest of honor, seated between Mrs. Lair and Mrs. Fish, and the place of honor usually reserved for Mrs. Astor. Forgiving Bessie Lair noted that the little prince's simian manners compared favorably with some of the princes I have met. At least until he had slurped several glasses of champagne and then climbed to the chandelier to throw light bulbs at her guests. So
that rules.
Yeah.
They got a monkey dressed up and then got him drunk, and then he fucking flipped out at their fancy party with all their rich asshole friends. Harry and Mamie were in hysterics for days about their monkey dinner, as it came to be called, though the papers and preachers were shocked by society's decadence and wanton extravagance. Harry Lair and Mrs. Fish, they scolded, had held up American society to ridicule. Mrs. Astor was not amused. Mr. Fish did not care. Early on, he had questioned Mamie about the amount of time she was spending with Harry Lair. Oh, him, she answered her husband. Why, he is just one of us girls. Mamie and Harry began dancing to a wilder beat, with a driving rhythm of madness. Society wants novel entertainment, she explained. It is like a child. It thinks it has everything it needs and cries for what it doesn't know what. I try to give it Phillips. Another season in Newport with the same receptions, the same people, the same conversations. Same old food, same old faces, same old cakes, Mrs. Fish complained. The rarefied world of the Newport rich, Harry Lair and Mamie Fish had decided, was vapid, silly, selfish. All the men could talk about was their boring work and making money. The women couldn't even talk about that, for most confessed to having no idea what it was their husbands did. My dear young woman, one of the 400 told a visitor, there is no conversation in this country, none at all. No, none at all, and forgive me if I say so, madam, but here in Newport it is damn stupid. Harry Lair decided it was time to do something different, and set out invitations to a dog's dinner, inviting all of his friends' pets, accompanied by their owners, to a dinner given on his veranda, with leaves from the dining table set on trestles about a foot high as a table for the dogs. 100 dogs attended, some attired in fancy dress, to eat the menu of stewed liver and rice, fricassee of bones, and shredded dog biscuit. One dachshund ate so much that it dropped unconscious by its plate and had to be carried home.
Oh, buddy.
He had a big day. Good for him.
There's a lot of lists more of their like weird, stupid little pranks and stuff they pulled. There was another case where she had invited the cousin of the Tsar, who was like coming to the United States, the cousin of Nicholas II, who was eventually deposed and then righteously murdered by the Bolsheviks. Like his cousin or whatever was coming to America, and she was going to throw a ball in his honor, but then the other woman whose like house he was staying at, who was like her social rival, like didn't let him go to the ball in his honor. So when all the guests arrived, she was like in a panic, and she was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So she dressed Harry Lair up as the Tsar himself and said, the cousin, whatever, the Duke of wherever can't come to the ball, but the actual Russian Tsar is here. And then he came out in like a silly costume, and everybody laughed. And that was supposed to be like great fun. So it gives you the sense of this, a lot of the other stuff she did at parties was, it's more of that kind of weird exotic animals thing. There was one where they had like elephants, and they made like the wait staff hand feed the elephants like peanuts and shit. Another weird dog one they did is at like some crowded ballroom, they strapped a bit of flooring to the top of a dog and then like let the dog loose in the crowded ballroom, so people would like go to step on a piece of floor and it would turn out there was a dog underneath it. Like hilarious.
Was the dog okay?
It didn't mention he is dead now.
Oh, that's true.
But so it might be a little late to get comeuppance on these people. But again, this is like, if you have $80 million, this is what you're spending it on, right? Like, this is what you're doing. And simultaneously, part of why you're doing it is you're complaining that everybody's too boring because all they do is talk about money. And then the most inventive thing you can think of is to spend a shitload of money on, like, having a weird animal come and murdering it in front of a bunch of people, or, like, giving it a bunch of food or whatever. And another story, the way that I kind of got turned on to the story of Mamie Fish in general is I was looking up, just weird Gilded Age shit. At one point, she bought a $15,000 like diamond brooch for her dog, and then like showed it off at a party. And all this was happening. There was a bunch of other parties that they used to throw at Delmonico's, the restaurant in New York, which at the time where it was situated in Manhattan, because all these people lived around Central Park and the Upper East Side and stuff. Where Delmonico's was like in the southern portion of Manhattan, which was like next to where all like the workers' slums essentially were, right? A lot of like immigrant labor and stuff that had come in particular. Like that workforce lived there. And so they would throw these like, ostentatious, like grand balls where they would, like throw food at like a ape and they would laugh or whatever next to like, some of the worst conditions of poverty that have existed in this country. But in any case, so, she, as I had mentioned, she lived in New York, but she also had the house in Newport. She had a bunch of different estates. Now, her house in New York has a bit of an interesting history to it as well. It was built in 1900 for the Fishes on 78th Street on the Upper East Side. And I read somewhere that, again, she was kind of upset at her husband because he only gave her a $250,000 budget to build the house, which, again, through the inflation calculator would be upwards around like $7 million now. So she only had that paltry $7 million to build her house. And I found this New York Times article from 2007. It tells a little bit of the story of the house and some more detail on Mamie herself. Mrs. Fish was not just a social butterfly. She had strong opinions and the inclination to share them. In 1903, the New York Times reported that she thought President Theodore Roosevelt's wife, Edith, had a wardrobe far below her position. Mrs. Roosevelt dresses on $300 a year and looks like it, she said.
Jeez.
In 1908, the Times reported her anti-suffrage view that, quote, a good husband is the best right of any woman, end quote. In January 1915, she gave The Times a long interview in which she despaired of the changes she was seeing in the United States. Quote, there is nothing sadder than the growing class of rich young idlers in America, she said. Now, put that in context of like what she did with her money, and also put that in context, she's saying there's nothing sadder. This is 1915. The First World War has been going on for a year now. The United States isn't involved in it yet, but at this time, that's what she's lamenting as she approaches her old age. The idea that rich people are idling too much. Continuing with the article, she thought the occupation of servant had been stigmatized and said that if household employment were considered a profession, it might reduce the tendency of servants to, quote, walk out upon the slightest provocation, end quote. So I guess she had one too many servants who she would command to, like, you know, hand feed some kind of wild animal at some fancy party, and they'd be like, I don't want to do that. And she'd be like, where's the work ethic these days? You know, you can't find good help anymore. Mrs. Fish died later that year. She had a brain hemorrhage, I believe. And Mr. Fish continued to live in the East 78th Street house until his death in 1923. It was later sold to a school and a cultural organization. In the 1980s, the limited clothing chain rebuilt it for corporate use. And so this article, by the way, was written in 2007, and the point of it is that somebody had bought the house in 2006 because it's still around, this ridiculous mansion. And so I want you to guess, how much did they buy the house for on the Upper East Side, Manhattan, and who bought it? 2006 is
what could a house in Manhattan cost? $50,000? I have literally no idea. It's probably millions of dollars, right?
It is millions.
I'm going to guess $13 million.
Okay.
And as far as who purchased it, can we get some multiple choice? Can we get...
I know the answer to this, so I'm not going to say it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. A prominent New Yorker.
I'm going to guess 11 million.
Okay.
I'm going to guess 13 million and...
If you get it.
Michael Bloomberg?
That is correct. Michael Bloomberg bought the house for $45 million.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
So where all the ballrooms where they'd bring in giraffes or whatever, the rare egret that they then hunted to extermination that we talked about. And they'd slaughter them on the dance floor because they thought it was funny. Yeah. Michael Bloomberg now owns that house. For $45 million.
Continues to slaughter egrets for fun. Yeah.
Exactly. And again, like I said, it's on 78th Street. It doesn't mention the cross street, but I'm sure if you look it up, you can find the exact address. Now, part of why I was also kind of inclined to talk about Miss Fish is I recalled when I saw the name Stuyvesant Fish, I was like, I definitely have seen that before. And I remembered it must have been when we did the other Gilded Age episode, or maybe when I was talking about Peter Stuyvesant when we did like sort of colonial era bastards. Mm-hmm. You know, because the Stuyvesant family is still around. The Fish family goes back also to like the Revolutionary War. And they've married into each other a number of times. So there are a lot of Stuyvesant Fishes. Mm-hmm. In the case of this Stuyvesant Fish, Stuyvesant was his first name, but there were a lot that had both surnames as well, like somebody Stuyvesant Fish. And I was like, let me look into this. And so I started clicking around. And so Mamie Fish and Stuyvesant Fish, they had a bunch of kids, but I couldn't find anything particularly interesting about any of them.
Albert Fish doesn't happen to be one of them, does he?
Oh, the actor?
No, the serial murderer.
Oh, why did I? Oh, I was thinking about Albert Finney because he was in Big Fish. I mean, it's very possible. There are so many branches to this family. That was the other thing. I was trying to find a comprehensive family tree, and they're so confusing, and all of the names keep repeating as well, right? And there are multiple branches. And so, in the case of Stuyvesant Fish, right, his father was Hamilton Fish, who was Secretary of State for Ulysses S. Grant. And he had, he'd been a prominent a prominent politician. So he had Stuyvesant Fish, and he had another son who was just named Hamilton Fish II, who then also became he became a politician. He was like a congressman, and then I think he had some like low-level federal positions. Hamilton Fish III, so his son, right? And I'm going to drop a picture of him really quick.
Let's see. In
here. So this would be Mamie's nephew, Hamilton Fish III.
That is a racist-looking man.
He was a politician in the basically from the 20s till the 40s, and he was essentially like an anti-Roosevelt Republican, right? Mm-hmm. Anti-New Deal, like one of those guys. He was also a World War I vet, and also like a very like prominent like Nazi sympathizer who, through his anti-communist views, promoted and published English versions of Nazi propaganda books about like the communist menace, and repeatedly said like the Nazis have the best way to deal with communists one way or another. Eventually, as the Second World War happened and Roosevelt remained, and the New Deal and everything remained popular, and because of the war support, right, like he got called out for this. And he eventually lost his seat or whatever, in the 1944, I believe, was the election. And part of the campaign against him was like demonstrating that he was a Nazi sympathizer. And he said that's libel, so he tried to like sue the people who said that he was a Nazi sympathizer, and they were able to like demonstrably prove like you actively spread Nazi propaganda in the United States in the 1930s, and you were a critic of the fact that we like were at war with them. And so he got ousted, and then whatever he lived well into, I think it was he lived till the 1991. Wow. So he had like a long life of retirement after he got out of politics. Again, just living off of the residual money that's just been there forever, right? Like he didn't have to do anything. And so his grandson then, who is Hamilton Fish V, in the 1980s, also ran for Congress in somewhere in New York as a Democrat, and his Nazi sympathizing grandfather, who was like on his deathbed, refused to like endorse him, and instead called his grandson a communist and donated money to his opponent. Just totally filled with bitterness. Now, Hamilton Fish V, right? I do not believe he won that election, but he was sort of, he was like the more like liberal one of the family or whatever. And he ended up getting involved in all these different kind of like progressive-y, media operations that were going on at the time in like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They all went to Harvard, by the way, of course, because they've been here forever, right, and they have the money to, and they're still in the 400. But he worked at The Nation magazine. He gave a lot of his money and time and stuff rebuilding that. And then also The New Republic. In 2016, Hamilton Fish V was made publisher and editorial director of The New Republic. And this is, awesome. I'm just gleaning from Wikipedia here. And immediately there were emails from all the women on staff being like, he is an abuser and he's like sexually harassing us. And, they tried to like cover it up for a while. And then eventually there was an anecdote that came out that said like he like actively choked a woman in the office or whatever. And so as a result of that, he then wrote like a sad song letters like, I don't know why I'm being persecuted, but I guess I'll just bow out. And he retired to his organic farm in upstate New York, where he has like, I don't know, he grows like tomatoes or something, and he's like sort of, portrays himself as like an environmentalist or what have you. Oh,
that's so nice for him.
Right, because again, if you have that money, there's nothing you can do that will take that away from you. You just get to go retire to your nice big organic farm. All these rich assholes are all like that, right? Yeah. And this is like supposedly the more liberal one, right? Now, interestingly, then I looked at him, he has a daughter, Eliza Fish, who's a millennial. She's like our age, and she was working at The New Republic when these things came out. She was probably in her 20s or whatever, and her dad was able to get her the job there. When he like left, when he was forced to resign after the Me Too stuff came out, she stayed on And she continued to work there. She was like working in marketing or whatever. And she did a couple of other marketing jobs for the last few years. And then I looked in January of this year, she started working at a company called Voice, which is described on LinkedIn as, quote, a social marketplace for NFTs that help emerging creators get discovered. So the point of all of this, right? Like, why did I just like now walk through this, like this history of this family, right? And this is just like one tiny branch of it, is at the end of the day, right? Like when you see this weird shit, like the NFT thing just blew my mind. Because like you see that and you're like, who is this for? Like who is doing this? How is it doing it? And the answer is there is a family that has been here, you know, for 400 years.
Yeah.
That by the sheer merit of being some of the first like colonial settlers that like did genocide and just like got large tracts of land, just will never have to work any serious job ever, and they just have millions of dollars, and they might not anymore be like the giant movers and shakers that they once were. They might not have the same pulls in terms of like being in the levers of power, but they will now just eternally be protected by it. And they can do whatever they want. They can fucking fail. You can like commit crimes, and it's just fine. It's like, oh, you're a fish? You're good. Don't worry about it.
By the way, I did look it up. Albert Fish, not related, not part of the same fishes. However, his first name, actually, his real first name actually is Hamilton. He's also Hamilton Fish. So I'm now on the Wikipedia page right now for like Hamilton Fish. It says Hamilton Fish may refer to Hamilton Fish II, Congressman and son of Hamilton Fish. Hamilton Fish III, Congressman and son of Hamilton Fish II.
Noted Nazi sympathizer.
Hamilton Fish IV, Congressman and son of Hamilton Fish III. Hamilton Fish, American cannibalistic serial killer, rapist, and kidnapper. The other Hamilton Fish stuff.
Right, yeah.
I'm just gonna pretend. We're just gonna pretend he's part of the same family.
Yeah, he's one of the disowned sons or whatever.
Right.
You know, a bastard child of the fishes. And so again, you know what I mean? It's like you know, not to make too much out of it, but for me, like the stupidity of something like the NFT is the modern rich equivalent of like getting a trained monkey to like wear a little tuxedo and come to your party and then get him drunk and he starts assaulting guests. It's the same like idle bullshit. Yeah. It's just make work nonsense nothing for the super rich, where it's just like, oh, I have nothing to do. And of course, the irony of it too is like, you know, all of that is happening engulfed, just completely surrounded by like abject poverty. So it's not just that they're just like benignly, you know, not doing anything, and you know, and obviously when we look at the stuff in the past, and be like, aha, this is like kind of funny and silly, but they are still hoarding this wealth to this day. Right. And that group of 400 people or whatever, I would not be surprised if you trace the descendants of each one of those that didn't just like get syphilis and die or whatever. If you trace the descendants, you know, to this day, I would bet they're all still part of that wealthy social elite club, and they have been, and they will continue to be. And it makes me sick. So yeah, that's a little bit about Mamie Fish and the horrible fish bastards. Carrie, I believe you also have an interesting little anecdote that ties to a lineage that continues to this day.
It's a questionable lineage in this case, but I will get into the person I had and get to that little weird lineage thing that I found. The person I wanted to talk about was Sarah Winchester, which is somebody that Shane mentioned to me, or he mentioned the house associated with her to me a few weeks ago, which is now called the Winchester Mystery House. And it is open. Yeah.
I know about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is open if you ever want to go tour it, or you can look up pictures of it online, which I highly recommend. So Sarah Winchester, there's not a lot about her early life. At age 22, she married William Wirt Winchester, which was the son of Oliver Winchester, the guy who founded the Winchester Repeating Rifle Company, one of the very first repeating rifle manufacturers in the United States. You might know him.
The gun that won the West.
That's right. They had a daughter that was their only child 4 years after they married, and she died of marasmus, which is something I had never heard of before, which is a wasting disease. Very sad. And then a few years later, in the span of 1 year, Sarah lost her mother, her father-in-law, and then William also died of tuberculosis. So it was like a very difficult time for her, but she did inherit from that $20 million and a 50% holding in the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, giving her an income of roughly $1,000 per day, which would be $27,000 per day today. So if at any point you wonder how she could finance what I'm about to describe, that's how. So this is where the story gets like a little bit contested, depending on the source that you're looking at. If you're reading it on like a ghost story kind of site, it goes one way. Some people say she moved out west just to be closer to relatives. The more interesting take is that she felt kind of cursed and spiritually tortured by the fact that so many people close to her died over such a short period. She feels also really guilty about the money that she just inherited, supposedly. She views it as blood money that came directly from the deaths of thousands of people. And she goes to see a medium in Boston, a few hours away from where she lives in New Haven. She tells all of this to the medium about all her troubles, and then the medium, while channeling her late husband, William, tells her that she's never going to know peace unless she appeases the spirits of all the victims of Winchester rifles. And he said the only way to do this was to move out west and build a house for the lost souls. And Sarah, I guess, supposedly takes this at face value, and she makes it her mission to follow this guy's advice, and she packs up all her stuff a couple years later and moves as far west from New England as possible and ends up in San Jose, California. She buys an unfinished farmhouse, which I think was relatively small at the time, and she just immediately starts renovating it. She does not hire an architect at all. She hires a bunch of carpenters and starts instructing them on how to build. And she's got rotating crews, just 24 hours a day. She keeps hiring more and more contractors. Crews are coming in and out all the time. One crew doesn't know what the crew before it was doing. She changes her mind about what she wants them to do all the time. Again, no architect involved. So there's just, insane stuff like windows overlooking rooms, doors that don't go anywhere, staircases that don't go anywhere. And eventually the farmhouse turns into a 7-story mansion, since this team is just like building around the clock to keep expanding it. And then supposedly she's also visited by spiritualists and mediums all the time to get their advice, and that's what she was using to direct the construction of the house, the advice of all these like mediums and spiritualists, because her main goal is to appease these spirits, right? She was very, very concerned about being haunted by these spirits. She made some modifications herself, just like regular rich people stuff, luxury fixtures in the mansion, stained glass windows handcrafted by Tiffany & Co.'s first design director, Louis Comfort Tiffany. Also, the house had like the most advanced technology money could buy at the time: forced air, central heating, hot running water. Again, just like a testament to like the huge fortune that she had. Mm-hmm. And again, she did all this without an architect and in just kind of a haphazard way. So it contains just a bunch of oddities. Today, the house is only 4 stories. Before an earthquake that happened in 1906, it had been 7 stories high. And I'm going to read just a little from the Wikipedia here. The house is predominantly made of redwood, as Mrs. Winchester preferred the wood. However, she disliked the look of it. Therefore, she demanded that a faux grain and stain be applied. This is why almost all the wood in the home is covered. Approximately 20,500 U.S. gallons of paint were required to paint the house. Jesus. The home itself was built using a floating foundation that is believed to have saved it from total collapse in the 1906 earthquake and in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. This type of construction allows the home to shift freely as it is not completely attached to its brick base. There are roughly 161 rooms. By the way, it used to be 160. An extra room was just uncovered a few years ago. I think it was in 2016. They found like a new room in the attic. That's how like disorienting it is to explore the house. People are still discovering new rooms now.
New room just dropped.
So there are roughly 161 rooms, including 40 bedrooms, two ballrooms, as well as 47 fireplaces, over 10,000 panes of glass, 17 chimneys, 2 basement levels, and 3 elevators. Winchester's property was about 162 acres at one time, but the estate has since been reduced to 4.5 acres, the minimum necessary to contain the house and nearby buildings. So just the buildings take up 4.5 acres. It's got gold and silver chandeliers, hand-inlaid parquet floors and trim, and a vast array of colors and materials. Due to Mrs. Winchester's debilitating arthritis, special easy riser stairways were installed as a replacement for her original steep construction. This allowed her to move about the home freely, as she was only able to raise each foot a few inches. This is the part where I was like, this is very interesting. There was only one working toilet for Winchester. It has been said that all other restrooms were decoys to confuse spirits, and that this is also the reason why she slept in a different room each night.
Wait, so where did the
spirits shit?
That's why there are no spirits there. That's how she was able to ward them off.
The workers, like the construction workers?
That is a great question. I cannot answer that.
They had like rotating, work crews of what, like a dozen people at a time, 24/7.
Supposedly there were dozens of people in there, and the less sensational accounts of her life say that her real motivation for doing this was to employ a bunch of people and like get rid of the money or whatever, and that she wasn't really crazy. But the whole only one working toilet thing is quite bizarre. So again, it had steam and forced air heating. It was the home's conveniences were rare at the time of its construction. These included steam and forced air heating, modern indoor toilets and plumbing, of which I guess only one was actually functional, push button gas lights, and Mrs. Winchester personal and only hot shower from indoor plumbing. There are also 3 elevators, including an Otis electric, one of which was powered by a rare horizontal hydraulic elevator piston. Most elevators are vertical to save space, but Winchester preferred the improved functionality of the horizontal configuration. So she just had like a horizontal elevator in there.
What?
I don't. It's an insane looking house. You should, if you have not seen this, I definitely recommend looking up pictures of it. And then all of this continued literally day and night for decades. The construction just continued until she died. And when she died, all of her possessions went to her niece and her personal secretary. Her niece just kind of like sold everything that she didn't want. It supposedly took 6 trucks working 8 hours a day for 6 weeks to remove all of the furniture from the house. And again, this is disputed by her biographer, but that's what people think. Mrs. Winchester made no mention of the mansion in her will, and appraisers considered the house worthless due to the damage caused by the earthquake, the unfinished design, and the impractical nature of its construction. It was sold at auction for over $135,000 and then leased for 10 years to John and Mamie Brown. It's another Mamie.
Where are all these Mamies coming from?
Eventually.
It's an absurd nickname.
And, pretty quickly, like I think it was like the year after her death, the house was open to the public because it's just such an oddity that you really just have to see it. In addition to that, she also had she kept a boat that she called Sarah's Ark. And, and this was as an insurance policy in case another Old Testament style flood happened. She thought that was like an imminent threat. To be fair to her, other people say that a lot of rich people had houseboats back then, so it could have just been a normal boat. The interesting current connection is that I tried to Google, I was just idly Googling Sarah Winchester net worth before I had seen what she inherited. And the thing that popped up was Sarah Winchester's net worth is blah, blah, blah. She is an American reality TV star. And I was like, what? And it turns out that there is, the interesting thing is that the Real Housewives of Orange County frames this as Sarah Winchester claims or says she is the current heir to the Winchester fortune. So this woman was a guest star, or I guess maybe a regular cast member around 2012 on the Real Housewives of Orange County. And then she just kind of dropped off the map. I found a Twitter account that's linked from the Bravo website. Bravo is the channel that does Real Housewives, if you don't know that. And she has less than 100 followers, is tweeting weird stuff. So I don't actually even know if this lady is a real Winchester or if she is just some lady who said that she's a Winchester, and Bravo was just okay, let's put you on the show, which I thought was just really funny.
What is she tweeting?
I'm looking for her right now. Yeah.
I think, let's see, Sarah Winchester. I was looking at it earlier. Her @ is @Sarah RHOC, Real Housewives Orange County. She's got some, Real Housewives kind of tweets. And then she's got I may be a dumb bitch, but at least I'm not a Trump supporter. Being broke sucks.
Good point.
And being rich is better. Coke is so chill. It's practically a supplement. Go off.
Okay.
Go off, Sarah. I don't know. Yeah, and she's still tweeting currently on and off.
Wait, this is really her?
Yeah, this was linked. The @Sarah RHOC is linked from a Bravo website. That's how I found it. And if you look at her banner is @Lisa Vanderpump blocked you. So
I'll be damned.
her people who are familiar with the Real Housewives kind of world, that is pretty funny. This could be, it says join January 2020, so this could just be somebody that like took over the or something. It's really impossible to say, because really it seems like after like 2014, this woman kind of just dropped off the face of the earth. So I think the funnier thing for me to think is that maybe this lady just like fooled Bravo into thinking she was the Winchester heir, because I couldn't find anything else saying that there is a current Sarah Winchester who is the Winchester heir. I did find like a stupid navel-gazing article from a British lady who is Winchester heir, but it was nothing to do with her. And that's it. That's a wrap. There's a fake Sarah Winchester out there.
It's like the American version of the fake claimants to the various dynastic.
Oh, by the way, I watched
family
the Pope Michael documentary. Wonderful.
Oh my God! Isn't that so
right?
good?
It's great.
Oh my God! It's so sad, right?
It is. Yeah,
it's heartbreaking.
His little acolyte, the CC's guy, is.
It kills.
Yeah,
me.
that's the saddest part.
It kills
of
me, dude.
100%.
When they go for pizza, like
he's so happy to go for pizza.
I can't stress enough how
him.
much everybody should watch Pope Michael. Look up Pope Michael on YouTube, please.
Yeah, I want to go to the Mystery House.
We should go. Yeah.
I want to go.
I didn't realize it was in San Jose.
Yeah.
I'd heard it before, but I never realized it was. I used to be out that way. I never knew it was in San Jose.
Yeah.
The little like YouTube thing we watch, because most of the stuff when you look it up, like you were saying, is all like the ghost shit,
right.
And like there I guess there have been all these like people who have been like, I'm gonna stay at the Winchester house for a month, and I'm gonna prove that there's no ghosts here.
And it's like, would you do it?
And yeah, it's like, would you stay in a sprawling mansion for a month? It's like, obviously I would. Like, what
for $1 million, would you stay in a mansion?
Those are those like tweets that are like, for $10 million, would you eat an entire pizza? It's like, I already do. What?
I want to stay in the mansion with one working toilet, please.
I guess that's the one downside. So
they probably have installed other toilets.
I was gonna say, because if they're having like tour groups and stuff,
I feel like legally
people go to the bathroom.
I feel like legally they have.
Yeah.
Also, she did like in her old age install a window in the one working bathroom, so that way a nurse could see her. That was another tidbit that I read in case she needed help. So just one bathroom, and it's got a window on the door looking right at the toilet. That's what would you spend one night there and take a shit in that bathroom? That's the question.
I absolutely would. I'd make you watch.
Right. Oh. So, like I mentioned before, some of like the mythology around this house and around Sarah herself is like a little bit contested, and I wanted to mention this Vice article that I found that kind of illuminates a little of what might have been happening in the media at that time that might have like built this narrative. So Sarah genuinely was reclusive and eccentric, right? But what this article posits and what some of her biographers have said is that they kind of used her as a scapegoat to relieve collective American guilt about the proliferation of firearms and the damage that they had done. Like that whole idea of her having gone to a medium in Boston came from a New York Times article in 1911. And there were other like various news articles on like news outlets that were like painting her like that, like as if she was like a crazy lady tormented by the spirits of all these people that had been killed by firearms. And this is just a quick quote from the article. Toward the end of the 19th century, the American press began to seriously acknowledge the brutality used against American Indians, and the American conscience began to be bothered by Indian atrocities, Ignoffo points out in the book. That's the biographer. Sarah Winchester's reputation suffered scathing attacks of insult and ridicule beginning at the same time. Newspapers pinned the burden of guilt for Winchester-induced deaths on the widow, but there is no evidence that Sarah herself felt guilty about the repeating rifle or earning money from it. As with any haunted location, the reality is that the ghoulish legends surrounding the Winchester Mystery House are mostly exaggerations or outright fabrications. So, crazy lady that made a crazy house, but did she really feel bad about the money? Maybe not. Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, she could have just been running the mill crazy or on drugs, What
kind of drugs did they have back then?
Oh, they had the good shit.
They had all of them. Yeah, they had them all. Yeah. It was before anything was like illegal. I mean, you just buy it in a bottle.
All of your cough medicine was just like cocaine and
that's true. Morphine. Opium. Yeah.
You could just go to the pharmacy and like I'd be like, I'll have 10 bottles of laudanum. I'll be like,
wish that was me.
Yes, those are the days. Oh yeah. All right. Okay. So yeah, I guess what I wanted to kind of get into a little bit here, and Shane, you actually kind of like sort of touched on some of the same themes. But I guess what I kind of wanted to get into was, I guess what's sort of one of the things that's interested me about the Gilded Age is the way in which it sort of saw the creation of this new type of ruling class and sort of like the dissolution of or at least sort of the beginning or part of the dissolution of the old one. Like industrial capitalism made millionaires out of people who, oftentimes didn't necessarily come from this kind of generational wealth. I mean, some of them did. I think Hearst did. William Randolph Hearst. His father was a millionaire, like a mining engineer or something like that. But like a lot of these guys had become wealthy, very recently, especially compared to like the landed aristocracy of Europe, which was, all of a sudden, all of this land that had been, the source of their wealth is no longer as valuable as it once was, because the engine that's, driving the new economy is now it's like factories and cities and stuff like that rather than agriculture. And like all the, all the newly rich of this time are like steel magnates and coal magnates and newspapermen and stuff like that, and so railroadmen, so oilmen. Some of this old peerage system is sort of beginning to die out in parts of Europe. Some parts quicker than others. France, for instance, had some very good ideas about what could be done with the aristocracy. But like one of the places where it was sort of slower to die out, and where in fact the aristocracy remained wealthy, was in England. And one of the reasons for this is that there were like tons of marriages in the late 19th century, like arranged marriages almost between like the sons and daughters of American industrialists and like the sons and daughters of English aristocrats and stuff like that, and with sort of like the nobility seeking, I guess, sort of like a like a cash injection for their family, because these new like American millionaires were making money on a scale that like even some of the aristocracy of Europe was sort of inconceivable, right? I mean, people like robber barons in the United States were making sums of money that were inconceivable prior to that, and a lot of these like nouveau riche Americans are sort of like looking to legitimize their standing by marrying into actual nobility and stuff like that, and so there's this sort of kind of fetishization develops among like American robber barons for like European aristocracy, and it leads to, among other things, this sort of massive influx of European art to American collectors, and like not even like just art, but like whole estates and like monasteries and stuff that were like
the cloisters.
Yeah, exactly. They were purchased and then like brought over. William Randolph Hearst did a lot of this. In fact, was like purchasing entire buildings and having them dismantled brick by brick and then shipped from Europe to the United States and then reconstructed. So with that in mind, I kind of wanted to. I got a couple things I wanted to read from here with that kind of general theme in mind. There's a lot of good little anecdotes in here about this sort of stuff, and I'm going to have to trying to figure out. I got to read this off of Kindle, so this first part here. So this first part here is this is an excerpt from a book called At Home by a guy named Bill Bryden, which I've not actually read, but this excerpt was pointed out to me. Barbara pointed this out to me, so I wanted to share a little bit of this here because I thought this was some pretty good stuff that kind of gets into some of this. And so I'll start reading from this here. It says, America in 1889 was in the sumptuous mist of the period of hyper self-indulgence known as the Gilded Age. There would never be another time equal to it. Between 1850 and 1900, every measure of wealth, productivity, and well-being skyrocketed in America. The country's population in the period tripled, but its wealth increased by a factor of 13. Steel production went from 1,300 tons a year to 11.3 million. Exports of metal products of all types, guns, rails, pipes, boilers, machinery of every description, went from $6 million to $120 million. The number of millionaires, fewer than 20 in 1850, rose to 40,000 by century's end. Europeans viewed America's industrial ambitions with amusement, then consternation, and finally alarm. In Britain, a national efficiency movement arose with the idea of recapturing the bulldog spirit that had formerly made Britain preeminent. Books with titles like The American Invaders and The American Commercial Invasion of Europe sold briskly. But actually, what Europeans were seeing was only the beginning. By the early 20th century, America was producing more steel than Germany and Britain combined, a circumstance that would have seemed inconceivable half a century before. What particularly galled the Europeans was that nearly all the technological advances in steel production were made in Europe, but it was America that made the steel. In 1901, J.P. Morgan absorbed and amalgamated a host of smaller companies into the mighty U.S. Steel Corporation, the largest business enterprise the world had ever seen. With a value of $1.4 billion, it was worth more than all the land in the United States west of the Mississippi and twice the size of the federal government if measured by annual revenue.
Jesus Christ.
America's industrial success produced a roll call of financial magnificence. Rockefellers, Morgans, Astors, Mellons, Fricks, Carnegies, Goulds, DuPonts, Belmonts, Harrimans, Huntingtons, Vanderbilts, and many more basked in dynastic wealth of essentially inexhaustible proportions. John D. Rockefeller made $1 billion a year, measured in today's money, and paid no income tax.
God damn.
No one did.
God,
Income tax did not yet exist in America.
Oh, shit.
Congress tried to introduce an income tax of 2% on earnings over $4,000 in 1894, but the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. Income tax wouldn't become a regular part of American life until 1914. People would never be this rich again. Spending all this wealth became for many a more or less full-time occupation. A kind of desperate, vulgar edge became attached to almost everything they did. At one New York dinner party, guests found the table heaped with sand, and in each place a little gold spade. Upon a signal, they were invited to dig in and search for diamonds and other costly glitter therein.
Oh, come on.
At another party, possibly the most preposterous ever staged, several dozen horses with padded hooves were led into the ballroom of Sherry's, a vast and esteemed eating establishment, and tethered around the tables so that the guests, dressed as cowboys and cowgirls, could enjoy the novel and sublimely pointless pleasure of dining in a New York ballroom on horseback. Many parties cost tens of thousands of dollars. On March 26, 1883, Mrs. William K. Vanderbilt broke all precedent by throwing a party that cost $250,000. Though, as the New York Times judiciously conceded, it did mark the end of Lent. Easily dazzled in those days, the Times ran 10,000 words of unrestrained gush reporting every detail of the event. This was the party that Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt attended as an electric light. I guess that was her costume. Many of the nouveau riches traveled to Europe and began buying up fine art, furniture, and whatever else could be crated up and shipped home. Henry Clay Folger, president of Standard Oil and distantly related to the Folgers coffee family, began collecting first folios of William Shakespeare's plays, usually from hard-up aristocrats, and eventually acquired about a third of all surviving copies, which today form the basis of the great Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. Many others, like Henry Clay Frick and Andrew Mellon, built up great art collections, while some simply bought indiscriminately, none more so than the newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst, who bought treasures so freely that he needed 2 warehouses in Brooklyn to store them all.
Jesus.
Hearst and his wife were not evidently the most sophisticated of buyers. When he told her that the Welsh castle he had just bought was Norman, she reportedly replied, "Norman who?"
Oh, God!
That's pretty good.
That makes me so upset.
That's pretty good.
The new rich began to collect not just European art and artifacts, but actual Europeans. During the last quarter of the 19th century, it became a fashion to identify cash-starved aristocrats and marry one's daughters off to them. No fewer than 500 rich young American women elected to do so. In almost every instance, the event was not so much a marriage as a transaction. May Golay, who stood to inherit $12.5 million, was wooed by a Captain George Halford, who was rich and had 3 great houses. Unfortunately, she noted wistfully in a letter home, the dear man has no title. So she married the Duke of Roxburgh instead, and thereby got a rotten life but a terrific title. For some families, marrying rich Americans wasn't so much a habit as a syndrome. Lord Corson married 2 Americans, serially, of course, as the author editorializes here. The 8th Duke of Marlborough married Lily Hammersley, an American widow who was not hugely attractive, as one newspaper described her as a badly dressed woman with a mustache.
That's
but was
so
fabulously
mean.
but was fabulously wealthy, while the 9th Duke wed Consuelo Vanderbilt, who was good-looking and came with $4.2 million of railway stock. Meanwhile, his uncle, Lord Randolph Churchill, married the American Jenny Jerome, who didn't produce the family as much money, but did produce Winston Churchill. By the early 20th century, 10%, this is a kind of staggering number here. By the early 20th century, 10% of all British aristocratic marriages were to Americans.
Damn.
At home, the newly wealthy of America built houses on a grand scale. Grandest of all were the Vanderbilts. They built 10 mansions on Fifth Avenue in New York alone. One had 137 rooms, making it one of the largest city houses ever built. But they had even more palatial homes outside the city, particularly at Newport, Rhode Island.
Yeah.
In fact, they called their Newport homes cottages. In fact, these houses were so big that even the servants needed servants. They contained acres of marble, the most glittery chandeliers, tapestries the size of tennis courts, fittings heavily wrought from silver and gold. It has been estimated that if built today, the breakers would cost $500 million. The ostentation of these properties generated such widespread disapproval that a Senate committee for a time seriously considered introducing a law limiting how much any person could spend on a house. The architect responsible for much of this was a man named Richard Morris Hunt. Hunt grew up in Vermont, the son of a congressman, but at 19 went to Paris and became the first American to study architecture at the, there's lots of French things in here that I'm going to mispronounce probably, École des Beaux, I don't know, some sort of arts fucking institute, I guess.
Sounds right to me.
That sounds right to me. In effect, was the first American to be formally trained as an architect. So it wasn't, it's kind of going to a little bit about him here, but it wasn't until he was like in his like later in his career that he started like meeting all these fucking rich people and like designing houses for them, specifically the Vanderbilts. It says here, the Vanderbilts were the richest family in America with an entire empire founded on railroads and shipping by Cornelius Vanderbilt. A, quote, coarse, tobacco-chewing, profane oaf of a man in the estimation of one of his contemporaries. Cornelius Vanderbilt, Commodore, as he liked to be known, though he had no actual right to the title, didn't offer much in the way of sophistication or intellectual enchantment, but he had a positively uncanny gift for making money. At one time, he personally controlled some 10% of all the money in circulation in the United States.
Oh my God.
The Vanderbilts between them owned some 20,000 miles of railway line and most of what rolled along it. And that provided them with more money than they really knew what to do with. And Richard Morris Hunt became, in the nicest possible way, the man who helped them spend it. He built houses of exceptional grandeur for them on Fifth Avenue, New York, in Bar Harbor in Maine, on Long Island, and in Newport. Even the family mausoleum on Staten Island at $300,000 was as costly as many an outsized mansion. Whatever architectural whims fluttered through their brains, Hunt was there to satisfy. Oliver Belmont, husband of Alva Vanderbilt, was crazy about horses. He had Hunt design.
Oh, hey, that's the husband of one of the triumvirate. Yeah.
He had Hunt designed for him a 52-room mansion, Belcourt Castle, in which the whole of the ground floor was stables, so that Belmont could drive his coach straight through the massive front doors and into the house. The horses' stalls were paneled in teak with sterling silver fittings. The living area was above. In one of the many Vanderbilt mansions, a breakfast nook was adorned with a Rembrandt painting. A children's playhouse at the Breakers was larger and better appointed than most people's actual houses. It came complete with bell pulls connected to the main house so that servants could be summoned if a child suddenly required refreshment. The Vanderbilts grew...
Oh my God. Oh my fucking... Imagine that's your job.
The Vanderbilts grew so powerful and spoiled that they could get away literally with murder.
Oh, good.
Reggie Vanderbilt, son of Cornelius and Alice Vanderbilt, was a notoriously reckless driver who ran through or over pedestrians on 5 occasions in New York. Two of those he flung aside were killed. A third was crippled for life. He was never charged with any offense.
Oh my God.
That was just like his hobby.
Right, just drunk driving. The one member of the family who seemed immune from the urge to be extravagant or revolting was George Washington Vanderbilt, a member of the clan so painfully shy that people sometimes assumed him to be simple-minded. In fact, he was exceedingly intelligent and spoke 8 languages. He lived at home well into adulthood and passed his time by translating modern literature into ancient Greek and vice versa. He had a collection of over 20,000 books, giving him probably the largest private library in America. When George was 23, his father died, leaving a fortune of some $200 million. George inherited $10 million of that, which doesn't sound a huge amount, but that's equivalent to $300 million in modern money. In 1888, he decided finally to build a place of his own. He bought 130,000 acres of wooded retreat in North Carolina and engaged Richard Morris Hunt to build him something suitably comfortable. George decided he wanted I even looked up how to pronounce this fucking French word. I'm just going to say that. Chateau, but grander. And so he, what was ended up being built. This is the story of the Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina, which was then and still is the largest private residence in the United States. Closely modeled on the famous Chateau de Blas. I'm not even gonna try. Some fucking French chateau. It is a rambling, gloriously
oh my god! I'm looking at a picture of it.
Yeah,
Jesus,
let me see it. Send it.
Yeah, I haven't taken a tour of it, but I have been to it. I've been to Asheville for concerts and stuff, and I have driven by and seen this fucking place. It is it comprises 250 rooms, a frontage 780 feet long, and a footprint of 5 acres. It was and remains the largest house ever built in America.
Wow.
For its construction, George employed 1,000 workers at an average wage of 90 cents a day. George Vanderbilt filled Biltmore with the finest of everything Europeans would sell him, which in the late 1880s was practically everything. Tapestries, furnishings, classic works of art. The scale recalls, and in some crucial respects exceeds, the manic excess of William Beckford at Fonthill Abbey. The dining room table could seat 76. The ceiling was 75 feet above the floor. For the grounds, he brought in the aging Frederick Law Olmsted, designer of Central Park in New York, who persuaded George to turn much of the estate into experimental forest. The U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, J. Sterling Morton, marveled that Vanderbilt employed more men and had a larger budget for his single forest than Morton had for an entire federal department. The estate had 200 miles of woods. The estate had 200 miles of roads. It included a town, a small city, really, complete with schools, a hospital, churches, railroad station, banks, and shops to serve the estate's 2,000 employees and their families.
Holy shit.
They were not, it says here, workers lived a prosperous but semi-feudal existence bound by many rules. They were not allowed to keep dogs, for instance. To support the estate, George's forests were logged for timber, and his many farms produced fruit, vegetables, dairy products, eggs, poultry, and livestock. He also engaged in some manufacturing and processing. George intended to live there with his mother for part of each year, but she died soon after Biltmore was completed. So he resided alone in massive solitude until 1898, when he married Edith Stuyvesant Dresser. There's the Stuyvesants again, with whom he produced a single child, Cornelia. By this point, it was becoming clear that the estate was an economic disaster. Annual losses were running at $250,000, and George had to keep the place afloat out of a dwindling stock of capital. In 1914, he died suddenly. His wife and daughter sold as much of the estate as they could, as quickly as they could, and declined to ever have anything to do with it again. So yeah, so there's that. I did want to read one other thing here. I wanted to get into a little bit about it actually is the cloisters, like you mentioned, Shane. There's another sort of interesting anecdote I found a little bit about the process by which William Randolph Hearst had these Spanish monasteries essentially like stolen. Had them purchased them and had them dismantled brick by brick and then brought over. And again, like I said, it's part of this weird sort of fetishization of all these like American robber barons to sort of like give some sort of legitimacy to their wealth by like either marrying their daughters over to like European aristocracy or by having this like vast, collection of European art or, like fucking Shakespeare first drafts or whatever. And then, or in the case of, William Randolph Hearst, and actually not just him, several, many other people of the time, literally purchasing entire European estates or homes or monasteries and having them brought over. There's one actually in Richmond. It's called Ashcroft. I think it's called Ashcroft Manor. I think this article goes into a little bit of it, but there's several of them. They're sort of still all over the place here.
Yeah, the cloisters, just quickly, I mean, because I've been to it a number of times, because it's on the northern tip of Manhattan, and it was Rockefeller Jr.
Mm-hmm.
It was Rockefeller's son who inherited all this money, and then supposedly again the line is like he became a philanthropist. Which just meant he just spent all the money. Like he didn't like do anything. He didn't have a job. And he went to like a monastery in the south of France, and he was like, I love this.
Right.
I want this. And so they disassembled it piece by piece. He bought it, they disassembled it, and they reassembled it. And so it's just in fucking Manhattan. You can just go, now it's like a museum or whatever. And I've been there a couple times, and it's like interesting. It's, it's quite beautiful, and, it's kind of weird and bizarre that the history exists there, but it's just like, why the fuck is this here? Like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Like, what? Like, what?
All right, so no, what I wanted to read from a little bit here. This is an article. This was on. This is from the website Atlas Obscura, and I'm not going to read all of this. But so, like, the article opens up by, I believe the first one of these monasteries it's profiling is one that's it's down in. It was brought over to the United States and reassembled in Miami, Florida. So like the article opens up by talking a little bit about that one, and then it gets more to sort of more into the history of it, which is what I'm going to start reading from here. It says, there are two Americans to thank for the strange fact of a 12th century Spanish monastery's existence only a few miles from Miami Beach. Notorious plutocrat William Randolph Hearst and his art dealer Arthur Bine. Together, these two men thwarted Spanish authorities, angry townspeople, and all common sense to drag not one but two monasteries to the shores of America. In December 1926, the New York Times printed a brief article on Hearst's importation of St. Bernard de Clairvaux, stone by stone, from Segovia, Spain. William Randolph Hearst was no stranger to the Times. A newspaper magnate, short-lived congressman for New York, and perpetual tabloid fixture for his high-profile romantic affairs and fights with fellow tycoons, Hearst had a proclivity for spending money in the most ostentatious, self-congratulatory ways. A regular Times reader of the era would not be surprised to hear that Hearst had imported an entire medieval building. The complexity of that achievement was given scant space. The journalist covering the purchase included only a brief note on the obstacles Hearst faced in dismantling and moving a monastery out of Spain. Twice during the work of removing the cloister, the villagers, banding together, drove the working men away on the ground that foreigners were robbing the community of its greatest treasure. The article went on to assure readers that, quote, the cloister will be the only precious work of art allowed to leave Spain, for a law passed 2 months ago prohibits further exportation of works of art in ruins. Yet just 5 years later, 11 ships filled with the pieces of a second Spanish monastery bought by Hearst docked in San Francisco Bay in spite of the new laws. Who let this happen, and why were Americans buying, shipping, and reconstructing medieval European buildings in the first place? The answer to both of these questions was, at least in part, Arthur Bine. This is Hearst's art dealer. In 1930, Bine, a renowned American dealer of Spanish art, stumbled upon the monastery of Santa Maria de Ovila, nestled in a small valley created by a bend in the river Tagus in central Spain. Bine had developed something of a complicated reputation in the country since arriving there 20 years earlier. In 1910, Bine undertook his first trip through Spain to photograph and catalog the nation's medieval monuments. He soon earned the trust of the Spanish government and its art community and became a leading expert on Spain's cultural heritage, even receiving recognition from the king in 1927. But at the same time, Bine was leveraging these relationships to build a bustling business in the antiquities trade, exporting furniture, fireplaces, ceilings, statues, and other Spanish treasures to his American clients. My only role in life is taking down old works of art, conserving them to the best of my ability, and shipping them to America, Bine reflected in a 1934 letter to Julia Morgan, an architect colleague back in California. The monastery, a home to some kind of monk, beginning in 1180, had a typically medieval monastery plan, with a series of buildings and constructed around a cloister with arcaded walkways. The church sat on the north side of the cloister, while the monks' wing attached to the east side, which included the library, the chapter house, and probably a common room for the monks. On the south wing, opposite the church, stood the refectory, kitchen, pantry, and a warming room. The bodega, a utilitarian building containing a long subterranean vault for wine storage, made up the monastery's west side. Upon encountering the site, Bine knew he had an ideal buyer in William Randolph Hearst. Hearst had a reputation as an unpredictable but prolific art collector. As one of his dealers assessed in a very backhanded compliment, nobody I have known showed simultaneously such a voracious desire to acquire and so little discrimination in doing it. Hearst also had a particular interest in Spain. He once wrote in a letter to his mother that Spain was, quote, a tired, worn-out monarch prime for exploitation by foreign elites. He declared, "We will burst through the Pyrenees into Spain and ravage the country." How does that strike you? However, Hearst also had a specific goal in mind for Santa Maria de Avila. It would be part of a 61-bedroom medieval castle in the California wilderness called Winton Castle. Hearst was less interested in historical preservation, and his design included a swimming pool constructed from Santa Maria de Avila's 150-foot-long chapel with a diving board installed on the site of the former altar. The choir at the north end of the church would serve as a women's dressing room, and the chapel's apse would be scattered with 2 or 3 feet of sand, creating a beach for sunbathing. After a series of exchanges with Bine, Hearst approved the purchase of the entire monastery. From the moment Hearst agreed to shell out the cash, around $300,000 in total, Bine realized he was facing a number of challenges in moving a monastery stone by stone across the Atlantic Ocean to a California forest. Luckily, American money worked wonders on a weak Spanish government. The first and perhaps most pressing issue was that taking a monastery out of Spain violated a host of Spanish cultural preservation laws, many of which the Spanish government had generated in the wake of Bine's previous antiquities purchasing binges. It is forbidden, this is a quote here, "It is forbidden to ship a single antique stone from Spain today, even the size of a baseball," Bine himself admitted. Thus, Bine took extreme precautions in keeping his project quiet. 2 of Hearst's architectural consultants, Walter T. Steelberg and Julia Morgan, corresponded about the need for secrecy in this matter. "I am not trusting, in this talkative country, to the discretion of any typist, and shall send all of my reports in pencil," wrote Steelberg. One of the ways Bine convinced the Spanish government to turn a blind eye to his pillaging was by convincing the Spanish Ministry of Labor that his project was a, quote, partial solution to the serious problem of unemployment. In the midst of a serious Spanish economic depression, Bine hired more than 100 local townspeople to dismantle the monastery. The disassembling process went quickly, thanks to the neat construction of the site. Bine described the monastery as, quote, a joy to take down. But moving the many heavy stones presented a more imposing challenge. Bine needed to transport the stones across the countryside to the port about 100 miles away. However, there were no paved roads in this part of the country, nor did it have accessible railroad network. Undeterred, Bine found the remains of a trench railway from Paris, a leftover relic of World War I when Allied forces needed to deliver supplies to soldiers in the trenches. The railways were less expensive to build and could be easily moved and reconstructed, allowing Bine to quickly lay down tracks in Spain. The simple makeshift rail lines previously used to deliver critical ammunition, food, and medicine to trench-bound Allied soldiers were now being used to move metal push carts filled with ancient stones through a Spanish valley. But building a railway to transport one rich man's illegal purchase was not enough. Bine's workers also needed to get the stones across the river Tagus, which ran alongside the site. Hearst's architects, in cooperation with the local workers, developed a pulley system that used the current of the river to pull a raft filled with stones connected to a series of cables. It took the workers thousands of trips over the course of 6 months to get the stones across the 100-foot-wide river. The instability of the Spanish government provided a final challenge for Bine and Hearst. When Bine began removing the monastery in early 1931, Spain had a largely ineffective monarchy and a sluggish economy. This helped Bine convince the government that monastery exportation was a boon to the Spanish economy, creating jobs and bringing in much-needed revenue.
But they're job creators.
Right, yeah. But it also meant that the government might collapse any day and could be replaced with a new government less willing to ignore Bine and Hearst's antics. In a March 1931 letter, Steelberg relayed, Mr. Bine is very anxious to just remove from the site all the carved or molded members, as he fears interference by the authorities at any time. We presented the entire matter to the National Art Commission, and they were entirely agreeable to him taking this forgotten and shameful, neglected, and abused group of buildings, but it is quite possible that some of the politicians, in an effort to discredit those in power, may bring pressure to bear through that press that would halt the work at once. A month later, in April 1931, Bine's fears were realized as the Spanish king fled the country and an anti-monarchist regime came to power. But luckily for the Americans, the Second Spanish Republic was about as effective as its predecessor when it came to protecting cultural heritage sites. Bine declared that the revolutionary Spanish government has, quote, more important problems than to bother about than the demolition of an old ruin. Time magazine later reported that Bine's workers nailed the red flag of revolution to the church that they were illegally tearing down and went right on working.
Oh, fuck you, dude.
By the time the stone-laden ships arrived in the San Francisco harbor in 1931, Hearst and Bine faced a challenge even more imposing than angry townspeople and interloping Spanish bureaucrats, the Great Depression. As the stock market crashed, Hearst's net worth plummeted, and his desire for a personal medieval castle with a chapel swimming pool began to seem like a pipe dream. Estimates for the cost of completing the castle came in at around $50 million, and Hearst's financial advisors finally convinced him that he could not afford to take on this expense. After all of Bine's effort and ingenuity, Santa Maria de Avila was retired to a warehouse and then dumped in a San Francisco park.
Ah, man. Oh, that's so shitty. That's so horrible.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, that's, I guess if you're, a fucking rich pervert of the turn of the century in the Gilded Age and you just have more money than God, this is just this is just what you do with your money, I suppose.
That's so upsetting that it just ended up garbage.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's so fucking
what
just
a waste.
Bleak. Unbelievable waste. Oh man.
I'm really
devastated by that, dude. I'm really. Oh God, that's so upsetting. Oh. I mean, it shows that, it's again, as I mentioned at the beginning, these weirdos from the past, again, with sort of the amount of time that's passed in hindsight, it's just kind of like oddities and, weird stories that are, seemingly like fantastical, and it's like amazing that they even just happened and just kind of bizarre and interesting. But they do have like these like long-term consequences, whether it's like, the permanent destruction of like some like cultural heritage site, that now is deprived from that community, or just the continuing like branches of their weird fucked up inbred dynasties still like running around, like doing odd things with this money amidst so much like poverty and inequity. It's so horrible, dude.
Agecroft Hall, by the way, that's the one I was thinking of. That's the one in Richmond. It's a Tudor mansion from the 15th century that was bought by Thomas C. Williams Jr., a Richmond robber baron, whatever, I suppose. I don't know. He bought the. So this was like a very fashionable, thing to do if you had more money than God, which is literally to just like buy a fucking antique mansion or castle or something and dismantle it and bring it to fucking, I don't know, like New Jersey or something.
Yeah. As something I think maybe when you were talking about the World Wars, one other thing I was reminded of that I don't think I mentioned when I was going through the Fish family, but the Nazi Fish guy, Hamilton III, who was like a senator or whatever, his other lasting contribution was he, being like a World War I vet himself, was like always going on about the plight of veterans, but in the kind of fascistic way.
Right.
And he was the one who came up with the idea of the grave of the unknown soldier.
No way.
Yeah. So that's his like, that's still with us.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, and it's maybe a relatively minor piece in all the various like horrors and evils that like this empire has committed, but it's still like it shows the imprint and like the value that like this is their contribution to culture. It's either like just wholesale destroying some cultural heritage site in some other country during peacetime for like sport. Be like, oh, wouldn't it be interesting to take this thing and ship it halfway across the world, or contributing to a general weird like troop worship fascist culture here. They're bad people. Yeah. I was thinking we could combine in terms of like thinking about, how to punish these people. There's little to do with, the people in the past that we've mentioned, unless we had a time machine. And if we had a time machine, that opens up a lot of options. So I think what we should do is we should get the 400 that I mentioned, the list of 400, and combine them with the 500 like daughters that were married to whatever wealthy, nobles, British nobles, combine them together for a total of 900. take them back in time and replace the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae with the 900, wealthy socialites, and say, okay, there's like a million Persians coming down this pass.
What a fun party idea.
Yeah. Well, that's where I was really hoping you were going. I thought we were going to have like the 300 Spartans, just kill them, just slaughter them.
Oh yeah.
Or just real,
just
like, real badass like comic book, like
yeah.
Just fucking decapitating them in slow motion.
I thought you were going to say put them in the Winchester house and make them like find their way around.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Or you could do that with the 300. If we have a time machine, there's no limit. Just stick them all in
exactly. Put the 300 on one side of the house labyrinth, and put the 900 on the other, and then just have the jigsaw puppet come out and be like, "I want to play a game." And they have to navigate their way out of the house and use the one bathroom. Yep. That's where the key is. They have to reach in the dirty toilet to get the key.
Why is it dirty?
Because it's the one toilet.
I guess it's the one toilet. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right. That was a dumb question.
I think it would take the luster off of a lot of the Saw movies if they were like happening in clean, sterile environments.
Okay, fair point. I mean, it might change things up a little bit if it was like kind of like clean and sleek.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's just an idea. Just an idea if the writers of Saw are listening. That's what I would do. Just go with a more minimal approach. It's a bit on the nose that you keep doing dirty, rusty environments.
It's true.
That's my opinion.
Gaudy, giant, pointless mansions that all inevitably either become museums or garbage. Yeah. It's really like, I mean, it makes me think, and we should still do an episode about them, but what was the couple, the like timeshare billionaire in Florida who's building Versailles, the faux
Did
Versailles.
we not do an episode on that?
No, we didn't. I mean,
we should.
I think we talked about it during like a Patreon.
No, we should.
We didn't do like a full deep dive into them. I mean, that's a fantastic just documentary that like
one of the best documentaries I've ever seen.
But like, because the reason also I was thinking of that is like when you were talking about the Biltmore House, Chris. I think the plan of the Versailles one, if it was completed, it would have been the biggest house in the United States. That was like part of the ambition. And even, again, it's not maybe like tearing down an entire existing French chateau or whatever and bringing it here, but it's the same idea. Like it's the same concept of like they went to Versailles at some point, on vacation, and they were like, I want this. I need this. And I think the plan too was it was going to be even bigger than the actual Versailles. It's like such a gaudy idea of like what wealth is. Like I'm going to make a giant ugly fucking house.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, it's a good thing all of that gross excess and inequality is just a novel thing of the past.
That's right.
We certainly don't have to worry about anymore. We're certainly not, living through a second Gilded Age, except like woke. Also, like where our fucking like the robber barons of today, like they like I don't know, like change their fuck. I'm imagining like the U.S. Steel logo in like pride colors. Or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's on the train that's shipping the precious heritage monument.
Oh.
Maybe we should get the monkey from the party.
Yeah.
Use the time machine, bring him back like before Thermopylae and have him raised as a Spartan warrior. Then bring him back to the present or to his contemporary moment, like right before the party starts.
This is like an alternate Planet of the Apes.
Give him like a shield. Yeah, give him the gas thing from Planet of the Apes. That makes him super smart
and super violent.
And train him to be a Spartan warrior. Give him a bronze shield and a spear and say, just go to town, buddy.
And he'll be like, you can't tell me what to do because you gave him the gas and he does not have any masters now.
Or like, okay, the other, if we've got, hypothetically here, we have the time machine. So we've got that.
Yeah, and any gas from any
movie,
film.
Yeah. No, so like, we take the time machine back to like that fucking party, and we like save all of the dogs.
Okay.
And we like make all of the rich owners. We like fucking put all the dog food out in the bowls and like make them eat it until they pass out.
There you go.
We take their dogs and we bring them back to the future and save them.
And then we put Rolo there to confuse him, just so he has no idea what's going on.
We could make a whole hotel for them.
A hotel for dogs?
It could happen.
Wow.
Cut this. Don't let anybody take that idea.
Oh man, I don't even know how do we play this one out? The 300 soundtrack?
Yeah. Why not? Okay. Yeah, do it, bro. It's
just the sound of like blood splatters effects.
Yeah. Yeah. We really, Dwight usually wraps it up.
Yeah. We don't know what to do.
We always devolve to just like killing fantasies when he's not here. He really stops that. He curbs that impulse that we have.
What was there was something you posted, Chris, maybe a few weeks ago on Twitter. I'm assuming from a similar Wikipedia hole. There was like a gathering of nobility where they were all so fat and that when they like sat in the dining room that it like collapsed and they all like drowned in their own shit.
Yeah, they all drowned in the latrine. Yeah, and underneath I believe that was like at a church or something.
Yeah, have that happen.
Yeah.
But like also again with like the really absurd like comic book style like 300 violence of like all of these the nobility.
Then sick the Spartans
into the tub of shit like this is Sparta and like kicking them into the fucking tub of shit to drown.
Yeah. Aristocrats. All right, folks.
We like to have fun here.
Week.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, good.
Love you.
We love you. Bye. Bye.